I just remember this very, very vividly. I was walking out of the house to go to the car to drive to her house with my friend on the school there. And it was probably 15 steps to the car. And somewhere along those 15 steps, I heard clearly the Lord speak to me. And he said, "This lady is going to be your wife." I was so shocked.
And honestly, even now as I'm speaking, I go quite goosey because I sat there thinking, this is really interesting. This is amazing. It's the three things that I prayed about. Lord, and I actually had the thought, Lord, is this going to be my husband? Because it's the three areas I prayed about.
挑战您的价值观，返璞归真过生活。欢迎收看《10万个为什么》，我是你的好朋友路德。在节目一开始，提醒大家订阅我的频道，并打开小铃铛，千万不要错过每周五的精彩节目哦。
Yeah, so welcome Heather.
Thank you.
Yeah, Heather is from South Africa. If I ask you to introduce yourself in one sentence, what would you say? Like, who are you?
In one sentence, I would say I've lived a very adventurous life and still am. Yeah, just with the Lord, He's just the most amazing person. Adventurer. Yeah, yeah.
Adventurer with the Lord.
Yes, exactly. Ventures with the Lord. Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it.
Wow.
Yeah.
One sentence is a big challenge.
I know.
Like probably Heather found that as well. I guess I'm a passionate follower of Jesus that wants to see his will done in my life and on the earth.
Could you tell us a little bit about how did you came to the Lord?
Sure. Yes, I grew up in a family where we were encouraged to go to church. So that was always a good thing. We used to go to Sunday school. I have two older brothers, and we would all go to church. I wouldn't say we were a strong Christian family at that time, but when I was 12, I went to a camp that the church held, and at that time I made my own commitment to the Lord. And that was when I really started to know his presence in my life. And my brothers as well, they started committing their lives to the Lord. And so, that was the time when I started to grow in him from age 12.
Wow, that's a blessing, huh?
It is a blessing, just to grow up in a home where that's encouraged.
I grew up in a family that it was very secular. It was irreligious, I would say. I grew up in what I would call post-Christian England. So it had become a very secular culture. I didn't hear anything really about church, never went to church except for a couple of weddings and a funeral. So I didn't have a church background at all. I never read the Bible, didn't have a Bible. But I did like rock concerts, right? So I'd grown up, gone through my teenage years, then I went off to university, and I would go, this was near London, in the capital of England, and so if there was anyone famous coming through in the music sphere, they would perform in London. So I used to make it an ambition to go and see the best, the kind of music that I enjoyed, and so that was my passion. And then I did quite well in college, and my career was really taking off, and I ended up purchasing a property, like a condo in London. And that's all background to say that when I moved in there was a lady that lived in the condo downstairs that was a Christian. And she was part of a church that had arranged to put on an outreach that was basically a rock concert to try and invite people that would never come to church to find Jesus, right? So they had this vision. So anyway, I moved into this place, and she was very friendly, and she kind of welcomed me to the community, and she just asked me a random question, like from nowhere. She said, "Do you like going to rock concerts?" And I thought that's really interesting that she would ask that question, because that's what I do like doing. And then she said, "Oh, because there's this concert happening on the weekend, maybe you want to come." And then she said, "Don't worry, but it's being organised by Christians." And it didn't really mean much, except I didn't really know what a Christian is. So anyway, I ended up at this rock concert, absolutely not looking for anything spiritual. She didn't really tell me it was going to be anything different to a normal rock concert, but actually during the course of even the support act for this concert, the guy that was speaking from the platform and playing his songs. And he had a very simple message about his life, but he kept saying, Jesus loves you. Jesus really loves you. And I thought, that's a really weird thing to say. I don't know anything about this, but I thought Jesus died a long time ago. How can a dead man love me? That's weird. And then he was telling about how he'd been on drugs. And I remember sitting there thinking, that's probably what happened. The drugs messed up his mind. And now he's having these crazy ideas about this Jesus that died a long time ago. So I just kind of dismissed it. But by the end of his half hour of playing his songs and talking, something weird had happened to me. To the point where I actually sat there thinking, wait a minute, somehow I know Jesus is alive. I don't know how I know that, but I know he's alive now. And I also know that he loves me. Now, I didn't know anything about this kind of thing since then. Having followed Jesus for all these years, I know that was just the Holy Spirit revealing the truth of who Jesus is to me. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what was happening. But at the end of the concert, they gave out some Christian literature, a tract, and also the Gospel of John in full. And I remember literally running home thinking, there's something happened to me. I've got to find out. Like, I'm sure Jesus died. How come he can be alive? So I thought maybe it will tell me if I read this stuff. So I ended up starting reading in the Gospel of John, thinking somewhere in here it's probably going to talk about him dying. I didn't know it was right at the end of the Gospel, so I read the whole Gospel of John to find that story and the resurrection. And then in the early hours of the morning, I just prayed, and the Gospel tract told me how to pray and receive Jesus. And it was just, I had no expectation that evening of anything like that happening. And I got up the next morning completely changed. It's like someone had turned on the lights. Wow. The world looked different, and I knew that God was real and that he'd come and change me, and he was already with me.
Wow.
So that was my journey, yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
When I was first in the very first church, I met my first husband, and we got married when I was about 22. And he was also involved in the church that we were involved in. And in fact, we had a family business. My father and mother and my brothers and my first husband was working there. Unfortunately, he got involved in a relationship outside of the marriage. And so that obviously was something that he chose to do. He didn't want to actually try and make the marriage work. And so there came a time when we tried to work through that, and it's not what I wanted, but he said no, that was what he wanted. And so, so then the marriage ended then. But I continued. In fact, that particular church, we had a Christian school in that. And so the two children that we had together from that first marriage, they were in the Christian school, and I was able to work at that Christian school with them, which was such a blessing and such a healing for me.
A number of months before, I was at a Christian camp in England, and I went through a seminar, and out of that, I really felt the Lord showed me to stay single. Don't pursue relationships, don't get a girlfriend, you're going to be a single guy, you're going to give your life fully to me. And it's like, with that kind of passion, I thought, okay, I can get there, I'm going to serve Jesus, that's it. So I arrived in South Africa, definitely not looking for a girlfriend, wouldn't have ever entertained a date, because it's like, no, the Lord's told me not to do that. So that's where I was living, and I was going through the training. And and then...
But did you want to like have a relationship or
no,
marry? No?
No.
Wow.
No, it settled in my heart. And I suppose it started out of an obedience, like, because before I heard that from the Lord or sensed it, I was a young guy, early 20s, looking around at the girls that were available and just wondering, maybe I should, and then, he settled the case and said, stop that, you're going to be a single guy. So it's like, okay, all right, well, you know best. Like, I was convinced that God knew best. I'd worked that through already. Like, he was just amazing to me. Like, I don't want to do anything that's not in line with what I'm here for. So I didn't really. It settled in my heart, and it was fine. In fact, in one of the very first sessions on our training school, getting to know everyone that had gathered from different nations to do this training, one of the leaders said, I presume you single people in the room expect to get married one day. And he kind of just raised it as just like a conversation point. And I immediately was the first to respond. I said, no, not me. The Lord's told me to stay single. So no, I mean, you other guys, you can do what you like, but I'm not doing that.
And so, yeah, the story was, so I was working at that Christian school, and the church there had arranged to start their first course where they invited people from all over the world to apply for this particular course. It was like missionary training, and they were looking for people, for about 20 people to come there and live in a house. And then they would give them teaching every day, and then they would go out and just do evangelism on the roads and do all different things, just training people in missionary work and just sharing the gospel.
Say that while I was in the Falkland Islands, the Lord had started to show me that one day I'll be in South Africa. I didn't think any more about that. But then wind the clock forwards a few months, and I was in London, back in London, and the Lord, without going into any detail, showed me that I should visit a certain church that I'd heard of, but it was nowhere near where I lived. It was quite a famous church. And I ended up in this celebration service actually on a Saturday night. And it was like a high school auditorium that they had rented for this thing. I guess about 1,000, 1,500 people, that kind of crowd. And I just wandered into this place, not thinking, just sensing God had told me to go there, or led me to go there. And I just didn't know anyone, so I just found a seat somewhere, sat down. And then the service started, and part way through the pastor came and he said, just turn and greet somebody, say hi. So I can't remember if I turned and looked at this guy or if he turned and looked at me. I just can't remember that detail. But anyway, we looked at each other, and I said to him, I said, hi, are you local? Are you from this church? And he looked at me and he said, no, I'm from South Africa. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. And I said, hey, so it's weird, but I actually feel I need to go to South Africa one day. We should talk. So we chatted after the service. And anyway, the point is that this guy was one of the pastoral team at this church in South Africa that was preparing to launch a training school for ministry. So, yeah, I mean, as the story unfolds, that's the church that Heather was in South Africa. So that was the connection. So it's like, so then I end up in South Africa, and I'm there to do a ministry training school.
Anyway, I was working at the school, and I saw this whole group of new people arriving. One of the ladies actually came early, and she came and she became a very good friend of mine. And so before the course started, she was there about 6 months before. She was a lady from Iceland, and she really helped me through the whole difficult times of the divorce. She was a very fun person, very extrovert, full of laughter. And so she'd often come and stay at my house and help with the children, and just really helped me get through that time a lot. And anyway, she ended up living in the house with all the other people. And when Mike, my husband, arrived, she got to know him. So then, yeah, I was working at the school, and in my birthday's in May, and the course started in January. In South Africa, our year is January to December. So Mike arrived in the January, and in the May, it was my birthday, and I said to my friend, whose name is Alster, I said, for my birthday, I had a bit of a party, but Mike, I don't really know Mike. He's one of those young men that lives in your house, and would you like to come over for dinner on my actual birthday night? And maybe ask Mike to come with you, because I don't really know him at all. He seems a really nice young man, and he can come and have dinner with us. So she did that. She invited him to come, and so they both came for dinner that night.
I just remember this very, very vividly. I was walking out of the house to go to the car to drive to her house with my friend on the school there, and it was probably 15 steps to the car. And somewhere along those 15 steps, I heard clearly the Lord speak to me, and he said, this lady is going to be your wife. I was so shocked.
So what kind of voice is it? Is it an audible voice or a thought?
It was as close to audible as it could be without being audible, because I don't think it was audible, but it was a very strong, clear sentence that suddenly surfaced in my mind. I think it's our mind that ends up processing it, but it must have come from the Spirit. And learning to hear God is just another whole subject. But I wasn't seeking him to try and hear something. He just invaded my space with this revelation, and I was a little confused because I didn't think I was supposed to get married ever.
And so we had a kind of fun evening. And yeah, so anyway, then he left, and I was just getting to know him. And I don't think he didn't really talk much that evening.
And then I went off and I had dinner at Heather's house, and I was sitting there looking around at the scene and the two little kids that she had and thinking, I don't know about this. This seems really strange to me. I don't know, maybe I misheard. I don't know. That was how it started.
So during that whole time when I was divorced, I was just saying, well, Lord, you know, if you ever want me to get married again, in the different times that I was praying about that, there were different areas that I used to just think about and think were important to me. And for instance, my son, who's the eldest of my children, he was 6 years old when the divorce went through, and he had struggled the most because he really missed his dad, and that was really hard for him. And so I said, Lord, if you ever bring someone else to me, it would be really important that they accepted my son and loved him, because that would be important. And then I was involved in working in the school, and there was another couple that worked in the school, and I used to watch them as an example of a godly marriage. And I used to really respect them and thought, oh Lord, that would be wonderful to be able to work in the school with another man, if I ever got married, someone that shared that same desire, and that we could work together with the children, because that was my desire. And then I also helped with the youth. We used to go on outreaches and do dramas, and I used to really enjoy that. And I also used to pray, well, Lord, that would be another thing, that if I ever met someone that'd enjoy that, it would be so nice. And there were those three areas that were really important to me, because that's where I was finding healing at that time. So anyway, 2 weeks after my birthday, Mike phoned, and he said, oh, I'm just phoning for a phone number of someone. I haven't got their number, and I wondered if you had it. And I told him, and then I said, oh, are you at the house? Were you living? He said, yeah, actually everyone's gone out, so I'm just here on my own. I said, oh, have you got a car? Would you like to come over and visit? Which was really bold of me. And so he did. He came over that afternoon, and my children actually had been with their dad that weekend. And so we just sat outside, and I asked him to share his story with me of how he became a Christian and how he ended up in South Africa. And so we sat that afternoon, he told me how he became a Christian, and we were talking, and then he said, so now the course finishes at the end of the year in December, but he said, I'm actually going home in July just for a vacation, and then because my brother's getting married. And he said, I feel I'm going to come back for permanently for a few years, because I feel the Lord has really spoken to me about working in the school. And so he said, yeah, I just really have a heart for the children. I didn't know that would actually come, but the Lord's really given me a heart for the children since I've been here. And so he said, I think I'm going to be working in the school when I come back. And he said, I've also just love the whole youth. He said, I'd love to get involved working with the youth, because my eldest brother ran that. And then while we were talking during the afternoon, he said, it's so interesting, because at the school, because the course was at the school, so they used to come out and see all the children playing, and it was all part of the same building. And he said, I've watched your son out on the playground. He said, the Lord's given me such a heart for your son.
Oh, wow.
And honestly, even now as I'm speaking, I go quite goosey, because I sat there thinking, this is really interesting. This is amazing.
Three conditions.
It's the three things that I'd prayed about. Lord, and I actually had the thought, Lord, is this going to be my husband? Because it's the three areas I've prayed about.
And it was so unexpected. I mean, it was so strong. Like the school was actually happening in the same facility that we were doing our training, so I was around it. But I was exposed to what they were doing in the school, and I was so moved by it that we had one day off a week in the school that I was doing. which was a Monday. Our weekends were fully booked because church was Sunday and we were a ministry team, and Saturday was outreaches, and every other day except Monday was lectures, and it was quite intense. But Monday we had off, and I just felt I so appreciate what's happening in the school. I'm going to devote my day off to working in the school as a volunteer. And so for the second half of my training, that's what I did every Monday. And then that's the level that I was moved, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. And before I'd gone to South Africa, I had no interest in children at all.
Wow.
So it's like, how can God change your heart like that? I don't know. But that was really interesting.
Yeah. And how about to the son of Hitler?
Yeah. It was random because, there's a lot of, I mean, by this time the school was just about 150, maybe 170 children. It was that kind of size. So a lot of kids, all different age groups. But there was one little boy, when I saw him running around on the field, I don't know what it was. It just caught my attention. And sometimes when I'm on a coffee break or something, I would just go for a break and I'd stand and I'd look out at the kids and I'd try and see, can I see that? I guess I asked someone whose child is that, so that I kind of knew who he was. And I don't know, just the Lord put something in my heart, fondly towards this little boy, and I didn't know anything about him. I never really talked to him face to face, but I don't know, it was just weird. It just something was highlighted out of all of these kids running around.
Interestingly enough, in the natural, it wouldn't have been someone that you'd think, okay, because Mike, my husband, is 7 years younger than me. And actually, he even looked a lot younger. He looked like my son. Once we got married and we went somewhere together, we once went for a haircut. We took my son for a haircut, and the man said, "Oh, so do both your sons want a haircut?" So it was really funny. We used to talk about having a real baby face, kind of young face. He's changed, fortunately. He's got a lot of grey hair now, so he's changed a lot. Yeah, so I had that thought, but in the natural, I was thinking, wow, that's really interesting. It's not something I was thinking about. So I kept it to myself, and I just thought, well, I'll just see what happens. I'll just pray about it, and if there's other confirmations, or if he shows that there's something there, then we can talk about it. But I just left it. And then he was more friendly with my son at school, and so we'd talk a little bit at school, and I think we did some things in the Sunday school together. And then it was his birthday, and so we bought him some little gifts. So we started getting more friendly, but that was all. And then he went home in the July and came back, and we just sort of see each other in the church, but there was nothing more than that. And then one day I was working in the classroom, and one of the elders in our church, his name is Dave, his wife, Carol, worked in the office at the school. And I looked out the window and I saw Mike walking on the school field with Dave, talking to him. And when I saw him, I thought, I wonder if I should go and talk to Carol about what I'd been sensing, because I need to share it with someone that will pray about it with me.
Yeah.
And so I went to the office, and she worked there, and I said, Carol, can I just talk to you for a moment? And she said, yeah, sure. And so I said, Carol, I've got to just share this with you. And I was so embarrassed to share it with her, because she knew my situation, she knew my age, and she knew everything. And I said, okay, Carol, this is really embarrassing, and I just want you to tell me that I'm really stupid, okay? But I've got to share it with you anyway. And she said, no, it's fine. So I said to her, I told her what had happened, that I'd had those confirmations and what I'd been sensing. And I said, but I'm not seeing any sign at all. And I just want you to tell me that, no, that's completely ridiculous. Don't even consider it. And she started laughing. And she said, no, you're not ridiculous. But the interesting thing is, which Mike will share, is that she kind of had a feeling, because Mike had shared it with her husband. I shouldn't ruin Mike's story. But she didn't want to tell me, because we had lots to work through. And so she said, oh, can I tell my husband, Dave, how you feel? I said, oh, I don't know. okay, well, if you feel you need to, maybe you can tell him and then you can pray about it for me. And that was that.
I mean, at this point, I didn't know Heather was even interested. Right, so this was a big problem. At least I thought it was a problem. But I shared it with the pastor, the same guy again I'd originally met in London. So he got it out of me in a conversation. I didn't want to tell anyone. And he asked me if God had spoken to me about marriage. And I said, maybe I don't really want to talk about it. And he said, I think you need to talk about it. And I said, I don't think so. But he was a pastor and he was in leadership in the school, and it came a point where he wanted me to talk. And I said, okay, well, I can tell you what I've heard. And then he said, okay, I'll pray about it with you. And then there was a period of weeks where I didn't really know anything else. And I was still struggling through some things. I started talking to people that I don't know if they knew what I was planning. They must have known what I was planning. It got out somewhere with one or two friends, or not planning, but hearing the Lord. And they were trying to discourage me because it's better to stay single, and you definitely don't want to marry someone that's divorced. And it was like a voice that was contrary to what the Lord was saying. I was getting confused. Anyway, the whole thing came to a head that we don't have to go into the detail of it, but Heather had shared what she was feeling with that same pastor's wife. And so there was this unique couple, pastoral couple in the church, where he had heard my heart and she had heard Heather's heart, but me and Heather had not shared our hearts with each other. But there was this pastoral couple that knew the whole story. And both of us thought, I know this is very unlikely. I don't think Heather would be interested in me. I look like a teenager, and she's a maturer lady with children, and I don't think she'd even be interested. And probably Heather was feeling like, I don't think this young guy will be interested in a divorced woman with 2 kids. So it seemed unlikely from both of us, but there was this pastoral couple that knew both sides. And so they then initiated, like, why don't we bring this into the light? And then they did that. Honestly,
It was not a normal relationship where you meet someone and you fall in love. We didn't have any kind of relationship like that. It was really just a confirmation from the Lord. And I think for the journey that we had after that, that was really important. Because when I was working through after that, when we did come to realize that there was something happening between us, honestly, I wrote a list of all the things that were negative against it, and it was much longer than the things that in the natural were for it. You would just think, okay, I wasn't looking for someone much younger. I wasn't looking, he had absolutely no money whatsoever. He was a missionary. He had money. He had sold a property in England, and then he'd gone to do missionary work in the Falkland Islands, and he'd done some traveling. Then he'd come to South Africa and paid for the course, and by the time I met him, he had 50 Rand, which was like $10. It was like hardly anything. And so that when you've got 2 children, it's not the most secure thing. So I was looking at all those different things. This just doesn't make sense. This just, yeah. And he didn't have a career at that stage because he had left. He did have a degree, but he left his career to follow missions. And it was quite funny because my mum, each of her children, all being Christians, they all followed missions. And she was saying, oh, no, not another mission. But yeah, that was basically our story of the journey. When I got divorced, I actually was a very insecure person. It actually caused me to be very insecure. Because of the rejection. And even though my friend did help me, I was struggling in some areas. I had a lot of fear. And so I was not in a secure place. And so in the natural, I was thinking, although I'd prayed those 3 areas, I can't imagine anyone would want to marry me the way I am right now, because I have had a lot of insecurities. And my brother knew about them. The people in the church, I used to go for prayer because I was struggling so much in these areas. And so, yeah, when it actually all came out the way Mike was feeling, my brother spoke to him and said, you know, you've got to be absolutely sure of this because Heather has a lot of insecurities and I don't know if you want to take that on. Because it's not like she's in a good place. It's not like she's secure and she's all healed. There's a lot of areas in her life that need healing.
I remember that exact day because this was her older brother. He was actually leading the school at the time, and he called me into his office and he said, so I've heard everything, you know, well, he was in the room when it had all come out, so you know, we know what's going on. He says, listen, I just need to talk to you about, you need to be sure what you're getting into. Like Heather has a lot of struggles from what she's gone through, and you know, you really need to know that this is right for you. And I think he was just scared that I would do this and then wouldn't cope, and then his sister would go through another breakup. Like, he was being protective.
Yeah.
So he was kind of, in a fatherly way, kind of encouraging me, but I think probably rightly so, behind that was his concern for Heather. And I said, well, look, Drum, I think that the issue is if the Lord is in it, then he's got a solution to any problem. So that's where my trust is. What do I do? Say no, Lord, because of this point, or no, Lord, because of that point? Like, I mean, how far do you take it?
Yeah.
Like, because there's going to be, okay, we solve that problem, and then there's the next one, or maybe that's the reason why it should be no. You can't say no, Lord. You can only say yes, Lord, or no. There's no such thing as no, Lord, because he's not Lord if you say no. I mean, it's pretty simple. So it was that kind of, I don't know how we're going to do it, and it may be a struggle, but like, let's just do this. Like, the Lord will have his plan.
Yeah.
For me, it was amazing because there were some beautiful single girls
Yeah.
on that team and in our church that were looking for a godly man to marry them. And there I was, a divorced lady with 2 children.
And I thought I'd read some scriptures that talked about marrying someone that had been divorced. And so I looked those up and I started to read them, and I got really, I suppose, a bit confused, but more nervous, concerned. It didn't sound very positive. There's even a scripture that suggests or says,
Yeah.
if you marry someone that's been divorced, you're becoming an adulterer.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm a young, free, single guy. I don't have to become an adulterer. Why? That can't have been the Lord. So I remember kind of reckoning with that and saying, Lord, I'm sorry, I must have completely
Lost.
I must have missed this. You know, maybe I did. I don't know. I heard that, but it must have been some other voice. So, you know, forgive me for being so presumptuous. And I know you told me I should stay single. So let's get back on track. So I kind of just reconciled it, and I thought, now I'm going to carry on living. And the problem is that from that point forwards, my quiet times became what I would say very quiet. There was just like this heaviness. I just couldn't break through. I wasn't hearing the Lord. It's like the scripture became dull. It's like I'd shut something, like someone had turned a switch off or shut the faucet, or I didn't know what was happening. It's like, oh, maybe I'm backsliding, or maybe it's, you know, I'm struggling with ministry training, or to begin with, I didn't connect it to this subject of Heather and my attitude until something, I can't remember what it was, alerted me to that. And so then I asked the Lord and I said, wait, because I heard someone say you need to go back to the last time God said something to you and see if you've obeyed it. That was the principle. It's a great principle. Like, if you're struggling to hear the Lord, what did you do with the last thing he said? And oftentimes it just seems to create this pause if you're not following that. So I traced it back and I thought, oh shoot, it's that. So I said, okay, well then I'll reopen it, but you're going to have to explain this to me because I'm confused. So that was the beginning of that journey. And then over a period of weeks, you know, I felt more and more convinced that was the Lord. And I asked, it's really interesting, I said to him at one point, I need 3 confirmations for you, and I need them by the end of next month. Like, I can't mess around with my life. Like, I need to know this is you. And by the end of the next month, I'd received 6 confirmations, all different ways that I journaled. And I thought, oh, wow. Okay, so I know this is what God is saying.
So could you briefly tell us what are the confirmations? What kind of confirmations?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and try and find them. But I mean, some of them they wouldn't seem like huge to just an onlooker, but for me, it's what happens on the inside of you when it happens. There was one example I do remember, is I went into the ministry training center, and they had like a box if you'd received mail from someone, and there was a card that someone had sent me, and I opened it up, and it was just like a just an encouraging card. But they'd written a verse in there that when I looked it up, it talked about having a wife that was a fruitful vine. It's in the Psalms. And some suggestion about many children. And it's like, that was one thing, because I was just testing, like, am I really supposed to get married? And this was a person that would know nothing. So that was one example. I think and then there was another situation when I talked to the pastor. It's actually the same guy that I've met in London all that time before. And one day he was talking to me and asking what God was doing in my life. And I said, well, I feel like I've really got an interest in the school and what's happening, because I had a Christian school at this church, and really surprised me. I've got a real love for children. I've never really had that. And he didn't know anything. And he looked at me and said, maybe God's preparing you for marriage. Like, so again, now this was coming from a pastor. He didn't know anything that was going on at all. And it was just, as soon as he said marriage, it was like, oh my goodness. I think that's another confirmation now God is speaking through the pastor. And, it's like, and there were just different things. I think then I heard something in a sermon that was just like, okay, I get that. That's another one. I still had a couple of issues to work through. Two of them. The first one was, Lord, I'm really confused because you told me to stay single. Now you're telling me to get married. So did I miss that? And I really felt he spoke to me clearly, and he said, I did tell you to stay single, but I did not tell you for how long. You just assumed that meant forever. What I was telling you is, don't get distracted. Probably because I've got that person for you down the pathway as you follow me, but don't get confused and messed up with other things. So that's what he was really meaning, but I misunderstood. And it was probably a safe thing that I took it as meaning forever. So that was solved. It's like, I get it. Wow, God, you're really smart. That's so wise. That's amazing. Okay, I get that. So I answered that one. But the other thing was still this lingering thing about, I don't know if I can marry a divorced woman. Because there's that scripture. Like, how do I reconcile this? So then I ended up in England partway through that year. My brother was getting married, funnily enough, and I was at an outreach that my parents were involved in. By then they'd become Christians too, because of what happened to me. So I joined them and I went to this outreach, and they had a little book table, and there was a book there that I picked up. It was called God is a Matchmaker, by a Bible teacher called Derek Prince.
Oh, yes.
Now, years later, I ended up working with Derek for years, which is a real coincidence. But up until that time, I knew Derek as a Bible teacher, like amazing Bible teacher, and I'd listened to a lot of his stuff and really had a lot of respect for Derek. So I picked up this book. Oh, he's got a book about marriage. That's interesting. So I flip it over, look at the back of the book, and it talks about Derek. In this book, Derek talks about his journey into how he got married with his first wife, Lydia, and then his second wife, Ruth, a divorcee. I could not believe what I was reading. I thought, Derek Prince. Like the Derek Prince. And I know some people listening to this have never heard of him, but Derek's a very respected Bible teacher. And he was very respected by me. And I thought, doesn't Derek know what the Bible says about marrying divorced people? Like, I was intrigued. And so I decided to buy the book just to find out what he said about that. And he actually devoted a whole chapter to that subject, because he said he's seen so much brokenness in the church, of people misunderstanding the meaning of these things. And Derek reads the Bible in Hebrew and Greek, in the original languages, and he understands what is really being said in those verses. And in his book he explained it. And so I quickly read that chapter, and I thought, oh, wow. So this is okay. And it's like, that was the last thing that I thought, then all the barriers are removed.
Honestly, that was probably the thing, that God's faithfulness at that time. I was like, Lord, you are amazing. That you would see a divorced woman with 2 children where my emotions were not stable. And yet this person is prepared to say, yes, Lord, to you, and take that on. That's not easy to take on that when he hardly knew me, really. But he was so committed to the Lord. And I was amazed that the Lord would allow that. But the thing is, that's what gave me courage to trust the Lord, because he was showing you, I've got someone for you that's going to love you and accept you as you are. And because of that, the healing is going to come into your life. And so the healing actually only started coming once we were married.
We talked to each other and said, well, clearly the Lord is doing this. When shall we get married? So our first date, we got engaged.
Wow, first day engaged. So
Yeah, and then we planned we were married within 3 months.
wow.